Amen. Last day events, page 227, paragraph 3. This is what Ellen White says. She says that the Lord has clearly shown her, that the image of the beast test, which is the Sunday law test, occurs before the close of probation, and it is the great test that God's people have to meet before Daniel 12:1, their probation closes, before the shut door. What we've done is taken that statement, and instead of applying it or using it in the way that it was originally intended, we've taken that and put it into a different context with a different target audience. So what we've done is we've moved the close of probation from Daniel 12:1 to the Sunday law, and then we've taken the image of the beast test and been forced to bring that to a history or an event that precedes Daniel 11 verse 41. This is 11 verse 41, so therefore this is the history of 1140 part B. When this passage first began to be addressed, people were using the events of 2015 to mark the fulfillment of this issue, this prophecy. So I'm going to put 2015 here. I put it in parentheses because that is not true, it's incorrect. I'll put a cross by it so that you can remember. What they would argue is that there was a law that was put in place in the United States, the same-sex marriage law, where people of the same gender were given the same legal rights, the same legal standing as heterosexual relationships, and this movement saw that as an aberration of the marriage institution. Connected with that event in the summer of 2015, we had a general conference session in our church where there was a vote on women's ordination. This vote on women's ordination was scuttled, it was prevented from being passed, mainly because of the work of the African conferences and I believe some of the South American conferences. And if I can say it this way, it was the conservative conferences, divisions, unions, that were putting a block to women's ordination because the Europeans and the North Americans, they were happy to have women pastors. In fact, they already had women pastors. In some places they were ordained, in other places they were functioning as ministers, but they were not yet ordained. And in 2015 that vote got rejected, got turned down, and so we don't have an official position that allows women to have equal status with men. But because that issue happened within the church at the same time as it had in America, we saw this as the issue of the image of the beast. Now, the reason why this becomes problematic is because the person who instituted that law was President Obama, as we all know. And in that time period, many of us would see any president, any leader, as being wrong or bad or evil, if I can say it that way. So we'd bought into this idea that Obama was a bad person, and he, as well as any other president of the United States, would bring in a Sunday law. That was our position. And in fact, rightly or wrongly, really wrongly, there were rumors, there were discussions that people would have that many years ago some Adventists had a dream that there was going to be a black president who would bring in the Sunday law. And people are not in the congregation. It's a well-known story in Adventism. So people took that story and said, wow, a miracle has happened. We've got a black president. That could never have happened. Maybe that dream is going to be fulfilled. So we had little ideas like that. People saw that he was a bad president. He introduced what is termed the Obamacare bill, which was basically taking the health service, the private health system that they have in America, and nationalizing it. He wanted to take it much further than it actually got taken. And people saw that because they were being forced to enter into a relationship with the government that made them take out health insurance. And they saw this as a violation of their constitutional rights. So they saw this as evidence that President Obama would dismantle and destroy the Constitution. They saw this as a prelude, obviously, to the close of probation or to Sunday law. So that's a bit of the backdrop of why 2015 becomes a point of contention. Now, it's been clearly stated over the last 12 months that when you start thinking about two streams of information, just want to refer us back to this presentation that Sister Tess did earlier today. She's already identified that we have two streams of information in 4 different organizations. She's gone the USA, Adventism, papacy, and this movement. So I'm going to ask the question, what's the two streams of information in Adventism? She didn't go into the details of that, but it's going to go along the same lines of conservative and liberal ideology. She's already demonstrated through the news reports that she briefly mentioned, you can go and check them yourselves, in the papacy, how you've got these two streams of information. Hopefully we can see that. She's mentioned the names of these two streams. She's spoken about the two streams of information in our movement, FFA, and the movement that we have, and in the United States, CNN and Fox. I want to remind us that it says the USA here. Most countries have their two streams of information, a liberal source and a conservative source. People have had a real misunderstanding of how this all operates, of who is good and who is bad. Because if you go to any person, just look in the mirror, depending on what time of day it is, depending on what day of the week it is, depending on what year in your life, you're all good and you're all bad. We do many good things and many, many bad things. We make mistakes. We have wrong ideas, wrong concepts. So what people do is they say that, CNN, they do plenty of wrong things and Fox do plenty of right things. And sometimes they have the same perspective. So they want to turn all of this into something that's not clear, that's really muddy. So it becomes a confusing idea, so that there's no clarity. Now, if you take that concept, that idea about what I'm going to call muddying the waters, if you've ever done evangelism, if you've ever gone to an evangelical Christian and tried to persuade them to be an Adventist, you know the technique that they're going to use is muddying the waters. They're going to make it so confusing that what we believe is black and white, Sabbath or Sunday, they're going to make it such a confusing, such a complex issue that they're just going to destroy your message. Depending on how competent you are, how much grit that you have, and how clever they are, depends on who will win that argument. You're a Christian, you go and speak to an atheist, someone who believes in evolution, you're going to have the same problem whether you go to the fossil record or the age of the earth or carbon dating. Everyone's going to have their perspective, and they will run circles around you. They will make everything muddy, so you don't have this clear black and white perspective of what's right and what's wrong. It all becomes people's personal perspective, and that is what FFA are doing when we start dealing with these two streams of information as you go through. So we need to be really clear on this issue, whether there is either light or darkness, absolute truth and absolute error. And the reason why people find it difficult to see this is based upon our heritage as conservative Christians, because we have this mindset that when we talk about perfection, we conceptualize perfection as being 100% or totally perfect. And that really is not so. You can only be perfect in your sphere as a human being. And however great you think human beings are in the chain of life, the chain of creation, we're pretty low compared to God. The whole perspective of who we are when God says, be perfect even as I am perfect, be sinless, has to be understood in its context as a human being, not in the context of God. This is a real problem that many people have. And the other problem that people have is actually trying to identify what defines sin and sinlessness. But Ellen White makes it really simple. Adventism makes it simple. She talks about the great test. She doesn't talk about multiple tests. She doesn't say it's a multifaceted test. She just says it's the test, singular, definitive article. So we know what the great test is. It's the image of the beast. All you need to do work out what the image of the beast is. Now, if you're a run-of-the-mill Adventist, unlike ourselves, you know what the image of the beast test is. It's the issue of the Sunday law, whether you're going to worship God on Saturday or Sunday. It's not asking people anything else. It's not asking, what do you do with your money? Do you covet your neighbour's goods? Did you commit adultery last week? Do you lie and steal or cheat? That's not the great test. The great test is really simple. It's the singular test that's easily definable and everyone can see which side of the argument you're going to stand upon. And what God does, being clever as he is, he's going to use this singular test to be the marker to determine who is his disciple and who is not. Now, if I were to ask you, are you God's disciple or not? Hopefully we'd all say yes. And then I would ask you, if you were God, how would you be able to show people who are yours and who are not yours? I think most people are going to say those people who are good, as opposed to those people who are bad. Then we'd argue, well, what does good and bad look like? And we've had this discussion already, because if you go to the Gentiles, they look pretty good, don't they? We have a biblical argument to prove that. The story of the Good Samaritan. Who's the good person in that one? It's the world, not the church. So when we start talking about good and bad, it becomes a confusing issue because we don't know how to define what good and bad is. It becomes an unmanageable problem. So what God does is, because we're humans, we're very simplistic, he just breaks it down into a really simple issue, which he calls what? The great test. Singular test is easy to deal with. You know whether you're passed or failed. It's not some nebulous idea, this nebulous concept, so that you go through this experience, this waymark, and you say, I wonder if I passed or not. This is why people in this movement on the right side who are still struggling, saying, I hope I'm going to make it through 9/11. I hope I'm going to pass the test because, I did something bad the other day, or I don't feel right about myself, or I got out of bed on the wrong side, or I'm feeling a bit grumpy today, and I'm depressed. Is depression sin or not? People are struggling with all these ideas, and they have no idea whether they can pass or fail tests. So if you don't have any idea, who has the idea? Who knows? You're going to say, well, God knows. If God knew what side you were on, he wouldn't need to devise all these tests. He wouldn't need to have any tests, because he's the one who's in control of everything, and he knows the beginning from the end. He knows which one of us is going to pass anyway. What's the purpose of all these tests? Who is it for? If you go to Daniel 7, it tells you. Thousands upon 10,000s of people stand and watch, and the judgment is set. The whole issue of all of this stuff is not for God to understand what's going on. It's so that we can understand what's going on. Go to the story of Job. We discussed this morning in a conversation that we were having. What does God say when he looks at Job? He doesn't say, I wonder if Job is perfect or not. He states it as a fact. Who doesn't know? Satan doesn't know. He says, go and check and look, and you'll see. Look at his behavior. Look how he deals with problems. And Satan says, he hasn't even been tested. You've got to apply a specific test to know if he's good or bad. Not so that God will know if he's good or bad, so that who would know? So that Satan would know, and Satan's agents, Job's friends. And not only Satan and Job's friend, who else would know? Job himself. Job doesn't even know what perfection looks like. When he goes through the experience, how does he feel? He feels bad. Did he pass the test? He certainly passed the test, because look at the reward that he gets at the end. Who pays him the reward? Who pays him the seed money? His friends do. His friends have to fork out and start his startup company, if we can say it that way, because they got it all wrong. So everyone needs to learn about what righteousness looks like and how it's evidenced, except one person, God. He already knew. So when we start talking about perfection and the tests, it has to be an issue that is really clear and easy to understand. It cannot be muddy or complex. In fact, who are the people that say it's complex? It's Job's disciples, sorry, his friends. They should really be called his disciples. They're the ones who muddied the waters, because they say, we can't tell if you're good or bad. So I want us to be clear on this issue. When we start talking about these two streams of information, if you want to know whether you passed or failed the test, you need to know that the test is easy to see and to be identified. Which brings us back to this story about the image of the beast, how we got it all wrong. We got it all wrong because we don't understand how parable teaching works. Can you just see that this is parable teaching? You're going to compare and contrast two groups, two messages, two ideologies, two concepts. And the problem is, in some ways, they look very similar. So you go to the United States, Sister Tessa's book, CNN and Fox. We could have put something else. We could have put the Democrats and the Republicans. Where do the Democrats and Republicans live? They live in the same house, don't they? Of course they do. They work for the same system. They're paid by the same bank. They're the same thing. How many Democrats are bad people? Lots of them. Maybe all of them. There are none good, no, not one. But the test or the issue that we're dealing with, we carve a path through all of that noise, and we're able to see clearly who is good and who is bad. You can go to a Spirit of Prophecy quote that basically says, there are a few good men that hold the whole system in check. Found in the Great Controversy. And what she's talking about is that there's this monolithic movement that wants to destroy God's people, to overtake the world, and the people that are going to stop them are these few people, and they're politicians that are going to be doing that. So you need to ask yourself, those politicians who are going to be doing that great work of stopping this whole system, are they good people or bad people? The way we think about it, because we're so ingrained in our false ideas, we think they're holy, righteous people. Now, I want you to think about this. This monolithic system is all a religious entity. The Christian conservative right. Everyone knows that. There are apostate Protestants, Catholics. If you want to go to the Dragon Power, there are all these people with spiritualistic ideas, but they're all conservative in their perspective. So who would fight them? Our perspective is that people who fight them are equally righteous Christians. But that can't be the case. You just see in the world today, it doesn't work that way. You go to America and you know it's not operating that way. The people who are resisting this Republican movement, this right-wing conservative led government, are people that we would call worldly, people who are liberal, people who perhaps don't have any religion, who are easygoing, who have no standards. We'd call them the Democrats. So when Ellen White talks about these people who are going to resist the move for Sunday, we need to really rethink, if we believe we're at the end of the world, who and what those people look like. So it's not that they're good or bad, it's that they have a different ideology, a different perspective. Now, the reason why this becomes important, if we believe that Donald Trump is the last president that's going to bring a Sunday law, someone needs to resist him. Who was the person that wanted to resist him? Hillary Clinton. So if she wanted to resist him, how can we develop a theology that would have said she could have introduced the Sunday law if she was put in power? It's not a correct prophetic model. She's a globalist, that's the kind of term people use, and he's a nationalist. And the problem is, Future for America hold the same perspective, the same idea as, I'm just going to turn these round. As this group of people. So when we look at what we believe right and wrong to be, it has to be on a very narrow, specific issue, which Ellen White will call the great test. It's not some general nebulous idea of who's good and who's bad. It's not like that. So when we start talking about these movements and we start saying Fox and FFA, EWTN, this is one perspective, one worldview compared to another worldview, which is all these ones that we've spoken about. And you're going to get the same issue here in Adventism, which I'm not addressing. Sister Tess will deal with that. The reason why this becomes important is because when you see the fight between Clinton and Trump, this is between someone who wants to introduce the Sunday law and someone who's going to resist the Sunday law. This is why we see the dismantling of the EU, the European movement, the attacks upon NATO. All of this work is being undertaken through the Trump presidency. The reason why that becomes important to see is because most of us have been brought up to believe that the EU is some evil conspiracy, some organization that was invented in some meeting that Satan had to bring the world to an end. They call it the globalists. And it's a completely wrong perspective of what end-time prophecy looks like. So you have heard us teach unequivocally that this is good and this is bad. Even though they may have many wrong ideas, they may have their own agenda, which we would not agree with. And if these were a symbol of the Democrats and these would be the Republicans, then the Democrats would be good and Republicans would be bad. And that's why we've developed this argument to say that what was happening here in 2015 was not the image of the beast test that was being introduced by President Obama. So we've made the argument that Obama is good and that Trump is bad. I want to read you something. This is taken straight from FFA. This was done sometime in October this year, towards the end of October. Sister Tess claimed that Obama was a constitution expert, which is a bunch of hooey. That's American for, that's crazy. Obama is as much a narcissist as Trump. And if Obama had actually excelled in his college education, he would have flaunted his records. But he has never allowed them to be released. He was evidently a failure at excelling in the education he chose. And Tess identifies him as a constitutional expert because he received a meaningless title at one point in his life. She decries Trump's executive orders, disregarding all of Obama's executive orders, and the fact that Obamacare was pushed through without anyone ever reading it. I can see those three representing specific issues that contribute to the civil war in the USA, those being feminism, Hillary, conspiracy theories, Trump and race, Obama. But she went the exact socialistic mile when she placed Obama as a symbol of race without identifying that he is obviously a racist. He goes on and on. All I want to point out, after this, I don't know what to call it, this rant, what do you get at the end of that? What did you pick up? That there's no difference between Obama and Donald Trump. Any one of them could have been the president, and any one of them could have introduced the Sunday law. So if anyone could have introduced the Sunday law, who was stopping Obama from introducing the Sunday law? You have to come up with some kind of conspiracy that says like God was doing it or things weren't quite ready. You'll have to come up with some kind of answer to say that Obama could have, but he didn't. And this is where the wheels fall off the axle in their message. You now get to a place where there is no distinguishing mark between Trump and Obama, between the Republicans and Democrats. They're all bad. It's a free-for-all. There is no such thing as two streams of information. And if that's the case, if you go back to this story here, if you go back to this story, 3/4 of the work for the Nethinims is done in the history before the Sunday law. This is the Sunday law. This is 1141. Now, we all believe, and I'm sure FFA believe, that to actually go through this line, to be cut out of something, you need a true message. I'm assuming that's inherently obvious. So the Nethinims must have a true message from somewhere to be given to them in order to begin this line. In fact, 3/4 of their history is before the Sunday law, so it must be truth. They must be receiving it from somewhere. So either we don't believe, they don't believe in this waymark where it is, or they're going to have to come up with some different kind of answer. Now, we understand that this is 2014. So from 2014 begins these 3 dispensations for the Nethinims. So even if you don't understand the ploughing and all of those symbols, what you have to understand is that these Nethinims need some kind of message. So if they need a message, who is giving them the message? And the message that they receive has to be a true message. I think that's obvious if they're going to be cut out from the world. It must be a true message that cuts them out, because the world is a false message. And if it's so, and it's in 2014, who's doing that message? We've gone over this so many times. It's not us. It must be the world. If it's the world, you know they're not getting it from the Bible. You know, that's clear. They're not getting this message from the Bible. So even though they don't realize it's a prophetic message, because they don't understand about prophecy, what must that message be to them? If they're not going to get it from the Bible, they're going to get it from their own understanding. They must understand what is right and what is wrong, mustn't they? Because the message is a right message as opposed to a wrong message. If the world is wrong, this statue, to get out of that, you must have something that's right. So they need to understand or be able to differentiate between right and wrong. Does everyone in the world understand what's right and wrong? Of course they do, because everybody understands morality. There are moral issues going on which are going to cut out these people. So all you need to do is understand what are the moral issues that are going on in the world. And we know this is going to happen in the United States because that's where all the trouble is happening. It's not the only places it's happening in the world, but we're going to do our story from the United States. All you need to do is go to the United States and figure out what is right and what is wrong behavior. It's a moral issue because they don't understand that they're living in a reform line. So all they can understand is morality. You know that's the case. What identification do we give for President Donald Trump? We say he's what president? We say he's the last president. How do you know he's the last president? Pause that. If you go to the world, go to these people I want to make another statement. We only not only do we say he's the last president, we say he's a good or bad president. Bad. What makes him bad? Is it because he's a bad person? No. Is it because he's a narcissist, as we just read here? No. It's because he's going to do what? Bring in a Sunday law. That's what makes him bad. It's not his morality that makes him good or bad. So we say he's going to be the last president. Ask any of these people from the world, say, is he a good or bad president? What are they going to say? He's bad. What makes him bad? They're not going to have the same reason that we have. They're going to say, you know what? As bad as he is, we'll just swallow deeply, because in 4 years, what's going to happen? He's going to be out and he's going to be replaced. 5 years at the moment, because we haven't gone through this election cycle yet. The maximum we've got to do is suck it up for 5 years and then he's out. So you know they do not have a prophetic perspective of what's going on. They just don't. They may use prophetic language. They may inadvertently say some prophetic statements, but they don't have a prophetic message, because they believe once he's finished his presidency, we're going to go back to normality. We'll go back to the system. He's just an odd aberration. Now you have people commenting saying that he's gone so far that we're never going to get back to normality. That may or may not happen from their perspective, but all of them know sometime, sooner or later, they're going to get rid of him. Because even if it's run by the Republicans the next time round, they're not going to get someone who's as strange or bad as he is. So can we see, it's so easy to understand that the world knows who is good and who is bad. I'm already smiling at my brother because it didn't work. So if they can figure it out, how comes we can't figure out who is good and who is bad? How comes we can't figure that out? And that's where the problem lies. So you can see the perspective that Future for America have, and they become so bold to openly say this now, that there is no difference between Obama, Clinton, and Trump. And that, by its very definition, is a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy theory to believe that there's no difference. And the reason why this is so crazy is because if we compared the movement with Adventism, would we know that there's a good stream and a bad stream of information, a good message and a bad message? Of course we would, because we invented this concept. The everlasting gospel is a three-step prophetic tested message that creates and then demonstrates two classes of people with two ideas, two ideologies, two messages. You either have the gospel message or you have some alternative version. We have the gospel, Adventism doesn't. So this idea of two streams of information, two groups of people, two messages, is something that we have well understood. And we've understood this idea within the movement as we saw people leaving the movement from 2014, Path to the Just, Tree of Life. We understood that they had a crazy message which was not fit for purpose. It was easy to see two ideologies, two messages, two streams of information. But now we're identifying that Future for America is one of those streams, one of those ideologies, one of those messages. And that's where all of this begins to become unstuck for them. They want to create a new narrative that they don't believe in two streams of information. That's why they did this, because they have no idea of two streams of information. They just don't understand it. And as we were taught earlier, they believe in things being half right and half wrong. We discussed that earlier on in the year. When they begin to deal with Mother Angelica, they're half right on that subject, but they're half wrong. This idea of being half right and half wrong is a continual point of problem in their methodology, in their idea. They don't understand the difference between right and wrong. It's clear to see. If it wasn't clear to see, there's no way that you and I could understand whether we've passed or failed a test. And we know this from all the previous issues. The 2520, you know if you've passed or failed the test on 2520, it's whether you believe it. 9/11, 1989, Time of the End magazine. Over and over again, it was clear to see whether or not you've passed or failed the test. In fact, last year only, they knew, they came on board, that time had now become a test. If you didn't accept time setting, you were out of the movement, and if you did, you were part of the movement. It's clear to see the difference between right and wrong until now. And that's what each of us need to understand clearly, that Future for America have become unstuck. I want to come back to this issue. This is not 2014. That's not what that image of the beast test is. The image of the beast test, if we looked at this before, I'm sure most of us, in fact, maybe if I asked you, some of us would have said it's 9/11. This is the test, the great test for God's people to bring them to the Sunday law. But it isn't 9/11, it's 2014. Oh, it's not 9/11, it's, I'm going to say that all over again. Before we taught it was 2015. It's not 2015. So I rubbed that off, and then I would ask you, what would that image of the beast test be? And I said, if I'd asked you this a few years ago, most of us would have said 9/11. In fact, today, some of us would still say it's 9/11, but I'm saying it's 2014. This is the great test that we need to see before we come to the close of probation. I want to read something again. This is taken from late October. It's another whole passage that Elder Jeff has stated in, I'm not sure where it was, maybe a presentation or a conversation. This one's a little bit longer, but I want to read this. And as we read this, you're going to see this is a connection to all of this. It's a connection to this story here, but then I want to show us it's also a connection to this story here. So I've got 2014 and I've got 9/11. Put it in parentheses. What would that image of the test be? Parminder placed an undue balance weight on Daniel 12:1. In so doing, he avoided a fact that was already established, and in so doing, brought in confusion on the subject. Once confusion takes place with a truth, then as time proceeds, uncertainty is attached to the truth. The fact that was in place before Parminder began his dismantling of truths that were already established was that probation closes for the priests at a point in time, but for the Levites and the Nethinims, it closes progressively. I don't want to do too much commenting, but all that he said here is that I placed too much emphasis on Daniel 12:1. You can see I'm placing too much emphasis on Daniel 12:1 because I want us to anchor us. I want to anchor us here, and he wants to anchor us there. So you see this undue emphasis on this. That's one point. What he's really referring to is this way marked here. This would be Daniel 12:1. I placed too much emphasis here. And the second point he brings up is that everybody knew that the priests, Levites, and Nethinim, the probation for the priests closes at the point in time, and the probation for the Nethinims and the Levites is a progressive matter. We all knew that. And because I emphasize it, I introduce confusion into the movement. So there are 2 points. We already know that it's a point in time, progressive and progressive. There's this idea, and that I place too much emphasis on Daniel 12:1. So I'm introducing confusion into the movement. It closes for the priests at Raphia, and then it closes progressively for the Levites, beginning at Apanium until the Sunday law. It closes progressively for the 11th hour workers, the Nethinims, at the Sunday law until Michael stands up in Daniel 12:1. So up to this point, all of us and them, are in agreement. This comment's probably 2 weeks old. So you can see that they're holding on to the same perspective of priests, Levites and Nethinims as we hold on to. Point, period of time is the close of probation. The structural placing of these is in the same place that we do. Raphia, then Panium to Sunday law to Daniel 12:1. So we're all in agreement here. Parminder began to place the emphasis, this is where things begin to go wrong, began to place the emphasis on Michael standing up as the close of probation for the 144,000, and essentially created 4 closes of probation. One for the priests of our history, one for the Levites, one for the Nethinims, and one for the 144,000. So if you see that, that's accurate, that's what I have done. When Michael stands up, it is the end of probationary time for all mankind, and it is the end of the judgment of the living that began at 9/11, not the Sunday law, as Parminder falsely teaches. So I've claimed that the judgment of the living begins at the Sunday law, and he says it begins at 9/11. So 9/11, you begin to see why they would make this image of the beast heads. Failing 2015, most people would gravitate to 9/11. I just want to make some comments on this thing. Now, if we want to go for a thus saith the Lord, if you want to use Ellen White's writings to understand what's going on, is there any other way to do it? The Bible and Spirit of Prophecy. Is there any other way to actually understand what end time prophecy looks like? The answer is no. Of course there's no other way. It's the only source of information that we have. We have to take all of those words and try to create a story that makes sense. Hopefully we all agree with that. We've already done this a number of times. Ellen White is going to give us a reform line, and this reform line is this one here. It's the only one that she gives to us. It goes from 1798 to 1844 to the Sunday law, to the close of probation, to the second advent. And you can put an agricultural line here, agricultural model, that you have the ploughing, the former rain, latter rain, and harvest. The problem that we find in our movement is that what we have done is introduce or create waymarks. The true primary waymarks that we've created or introduced are here. 89 and 9/11. And the question is, how did we create those waymarks? Where did we get them from? And I want to argue that it's absolutely clear to see that it's not from a thus saith the Lord. You cannot take a thus saith the Lord, at least the thus saith the Lord, as I understand what that term means. You take the words as written and you just take them at face value. They are what they say that they are, and then you make a conclusion about what you just read. That to me is what a thus saith the Lord is. You don't take those words and try to spiritualize them away, or you don't make an application of them, or you don't take them out of their context. You take them as they're written. That to me is what a thus saith the Lord is. And if you took that principle, how on earth do you get these two waymarks? We'll go with the first one, 1989, the time of the end. If you go to Daniel 11 verse 40, how many time of the ends is there in that passage? There's only one. It says, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall push against him. There's only one time of the end. Ellen White's going to comment many, many times on not just that verse itself, but the whole concept of the time of the end. And how many will she give you? Only one. The Bible and the Spirit of Prophecy are consistent on this point. There's only one time of the end, not two. So if you're going to go with a thus saith the Lord, you cannot create to time of the ends. In fact, over and over again, she will tell you that we are living in the time of the end, not at the time of the end. And she'll tell you things like, if you want to work out when the end is going to happen, in the time of the end, when you want to work out what's going to happen in the time of the end would look like this. She's going to tell you things like, no person knows when that's going to happen. We have no idea. The reason we have no idea because we have no time frame in which to understand when those things are going to happen. So there are no waymarks for us to hold on to bring us to these end time events. So what we do is we go to verse 40 and using a methodology of parable teaching, we create a waymark that is not there in inspiration, neither in the spirit of prophecy nor in the Bible. So we create a new waymark, the time of the end. And not being satisfied with that, what we then do is we create another waymark, 9/11. And 9/11 is not found in the scriptures. 9/11 you're going to have to search in Ellen White's writings, and the place that we normally go to for that is the book Testimonies to the Church, volume 9, beginning on page 11, and Review and Herald, July 5th or 6th? 5th, 1906. We go to those two passages. Sometimes people are more familiar with this one as Life Sketches, page 411. We go to those two passages, and what we do is not take a thus saith the Lord. We're going to take those passages and manipulate them, take them out of their context, and we're going to turn that into a 9/11 statement from these two passages. We combine them together and make it a 9/11 statement. Now, let me ask you, if I were to do this, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, you can call it paragraphs. If I said we both would agree that the subject of this was the close of probation, and we both agreed that the subject here was the close of probation, if we both agreed on that, could you then take this and say that this was 9/11? Do you think that's reasonable to do? And these are not even chapters, these are paragraphs. This is breaking all the rules. Any rule that you ever knew, you know this is breaking that rule. If you're going to tell someone a story, you begin here and you run through that. You tell a story here and then you jump to another story and then you jump back into this one, unless you made it absolutely clear with some other evidence that that was the case. Because this is what FFA would have you believe that Ellen White's going to be doing in these two passages, that she's talking about a subject matter and it's clear to see that it's the close of probation, and then she's going to slip in surreptitiously this event here, which is the event of 9/11. That's what they would have you believe. And I'm saying this is a clear violation of anything and everything that we should hold on to if we really believed in a thus saith the Lord, in intellectual integrity. We can take all of this, because it's not 9/11, it's the close of probation, and then we can make an application back to 9/11. We could do that, but Ellen White is not talking about 9/11 in these passages, and they still refuse to believe that. He's not dealing with that at this moment, but he's going to in a moment. But I want us just to see that this idea that he's introducing 9/11 into this story is really difficult to accept and believe. And I just want to say it for this reason. When Michael stands up, it is the end of probationary time for all mankind, and it is the end of the judgment of the living that began at 9/11. Now, Ellen White tells you that no one knows when the judgment of the living begins. That's the first thing. So if no one knows when the judgment of the living begins, how do they claim that they know it's 9/11? How do you know the judgment of the beginning began in 9/11 if Ellen White says no one knows where the judgment of the living begins? How do you make the connection that 9/11 was ever the judgment of the living? I don't know if you ever thought about that when we spoke about 9/11, when this movement goes on and on about 9/11. Why do we ever even tie back the judgment of the living to that reference point? So I just want to give a simple answer to that. The simple answer is this, that what we do is we take Spirit of Prophecy quotes that talk about the latter rain. That we talk about the subject of the latter rain, and then connected with the subject of the latter rain, we take the story of Revelation 18, and when you connect the story of the latter rain, or her quotes, connect that with the subject of Revelation 18, and then the story of the loud cry, when you start comparing all of these concepts together, and then start dealing with the close of probation, you take all of these thoughts and ideas, and it leads you to the idea or the point of the judgment of the living. That's how we got the judgment of the living tied back to 9/11, because what we do is we say in the past, the latter rain began here at 9/11. Then we say Revelation 18 came down at 9/11. Then we say the loud cry, which is connected to this story, which we're going to change, not call it the loud cry. What do we want to call it? The midnight cry. Began in that history, and it's going to be connected with this close of probation that's about to come, and all of this deals with the judgment of the living. That's why he says that, from his perspective, we all know that the judgment of the living began at 9/11. That's the way he's going to approach that, and not as a Sunday law, as I falsely teach. I'm going to go over this at least one or two times, so that's why I'm jumping back and forth. I want us to see something. Just take the concept of judging someone. We call it the judgment of the living, but just judging someone. When you judge someone, what does that mean? What's the inference behind judging someone? They must have done something, they must have made some action, and what are you going to do? You're going to make a judgment or a comment or an observation of what they've just done. Hopefully we can see that. If you go back to the original judgment story, perhaps not the original one, but the second original one, we'll go to Cain and Abel. When you start judging that story, what event do we focus on? What event are we given? It's not did they fight or squabble over their toys, is it? Or one of them was rude or disrespectful to their parents. What was the test? It was about that sacrifice. One was going to offer a lamb, one was going to offer their produce. So it's a specific test. That was the test that marked who was going to be good and who was going to be bad. That was the great test for them. And based upon that great test, what can you do? Judge them. Who's right and who's wrong? Are we okay with that concept? So if you're going to make any kind of judgment upon someone, what do you need to have done first? You have to have tested them first to see if they've passed or failed the test so that they're going to be judged. So take Ellen White's model, her concept of that. Now, the judgment of the living is a big issue in Bible prophecy. So it's the big thing that you're going to transfer or transition from the judgment of the dead to the judgment of the living. And if you're going to judge living people, what do you need to do? You need to test them. What test do you want to bring to those people? What they eat, what they drink, how they dress? Did they go to work and steal a pen? What test do you want to bring to people at the end of the world, the final generation, to know whether they have passed or failed in the judgment? Wouldn't you have to have a big test for them? What would be the big test? My brother says the crisis. Ellen White says in Last Day Events, he's on the other side of the board, 227, what did she say? The great test. You have to give a great test to know whether they're going to go through a great judgment on the right or wrong side. How can you be judging people before they're tested? Ask yourself that question. How can you judge someone before you've even tested them? You can see it's so intuitively easy to grasp hold of when you just think about it. So I'm going to quote what he says. When Michael stands up, it's the end of probationary time for all mankind. We agree on that. And it's the end of the judgment of the living. We agree on that. He says that began at 9/11, which means if you're going to begin the judgment of the living, what must 9/11 be? There must be some great test there. And there is no great test there because 9/11 is a manufactured date, not from inspiration, but from structure. And if we're going to see it, thus saith the Lord, we have to get all of that information from inspiration, not stuff that we manufacture. Because she tells you how you can find out the answer to these questions. We can't just make them up as we go along. He says it's at 9/11, not at the Sunday law, as Parminder falsely teaches. And I want to say, I didn't falsely teach it's the Sunday law. This is straight out of the spirit of prophecy. And when I say that, there's not a spirit of prophecy quote that says judgment of living is at the Sunday law. But you can't judge people until you've tested them. And the only test that's going to come, the great test upon God's people, Ellen White tells us, she defines it as being the image of the beast test, which is the Sunday law test. So you know when that's going to happen. If you want to have a secondary argument, we would take our line here in 1844 and we would say that this was the third angel's message arriving in history. When is the third angel's message going to be empowered in history? Depends who you ask. This is an Ellen White story. If it's an Ellen White story, is it progression or repeat and enlarge? It's progression. You're going to go from the arrival to its empowerment. And she's clear both in early writings, her first work, and the great controversy, her last work from the Alpha and Omega. It's always the same story, that this is at the Sunday law. This is the Daniel 11:41 Sunday law, the national Sunday law. It's not the 2014, the Raphia, the Panium one. It's this one here. That's when the third angel's message is going to be empowered. Now, if you take this story and you fractalize it, what we tend to do is not say that that's the empowerment of the third. We tend to call that the arrival of the third. You've seen plenty of studies that do that. I'll put it in parentheses. This message here, the arrival of the third angel, what does it mark? The judgment of the dead. The beginning of the judgment of the dead. Therefore, if you're going to do Alpha and Omega, repeat and enlarge, what would this mark? It would also mark the judgment, not of the dead, but of the living. It's the beginning of the judgment of the living. It's the great test that you can begin to make the judgment, because if you haven't been tested, what are you going to judge? Are you going to judge, was a person nice? Was he respectful? You can't make judgments upon people until you've tested them. And this judgment is so important, just like the judgment of Cain and Abel was so important as it is in all these previous histories. It becomes such a critical issue that you have to have a great test. And the only great test that comes upon God's people is the Sunday law test. Whatever we might understand the Sunday law test to be, we're dealing with it as a waymark in this line of history. The great test is here. Ellen White's clear on that, and therefore that's when the judgment of the living must have begun. It's not at 9/11. So when you take that concept and you mark it here, what you need to see is who is that dealing with? What is the subject matter? Because we know it's not the priests, it's not the story of the priests, and it can't be the story of the Levites, and it certainly can't be the story of the Nethinims, which is how this movement used to teach it, and which, even though he doesn't explicitly say it, this is the implication of what he's going to say in this statement here. He's going to infer that this judgment of the living, which began here at 9/11, or this great test that's been referred to, is something connected with the Nethinims and not with the 144,000. I'm going to explain why that is, because there's a fundamental disconnect between what FFA are teaching and what we're teaching today and what we've taught for the last 24 months, which they have been silent upon, which now they are openly attacking. The great test for the priests is not Daniel 11 verse 41. What's the great test for the priests? 2014. Hopefully we're okay with that. What's the great test for the Levites? Has to be the Sunday law. Do we agree with that? Has to be the Sunday law. That's the great test. Ellen White quote teaches us that. So we just take the quote and we apply it over each one of these histories. If the great test that she gives us is this one here, the great test for the priests becomes 2014. The great test for the Levites becomes Raphia, and therefore the great test for the Nethinims would become Panium. If that's all those great tests, 2014, Raphia and Panium, what Bible verse are they all in? Are they in Daniel 11 verse 40 or Daniel 11 verse 41? They're in Daniel 11 verse 40. So we haven't even got to Daniel 11 verse 41, which is the great test that she's speaking about here. That's what she's speaking about, that great test. When Edom, Moab and Ammon come out of Babylon, what Sunday law is that one? What great test is that one? Who is that great test for? Because it can't be for the priests. They've already had their great test. Can't be for the Levites. They've already had their great test. It can't be for the Nethinims. They've already had their great test. Who is the great test for here? The great test. Who is it for? Because it's not for the priests, Levites or Nethinims. Who must it be for? So someone's going to say it's the 144,000. So I'm just going to finish reading what he says. And this is the problem that you are confronted with, whoever you are, if you want to decide who's right and who's wrong. I'll just go back. When Michael stands up, it is the end of probationary time for all mankind. It is the end of the judgment of the living, which began at 9/11, which it did not. Not the Sunday law, as Parminder falsely teaches, which it did, which is why I've said that this is 2014. 2014 is the Sunday law. It is the great test for the priests. Began back here. So when I did this, how many of these would you have before you got to this one? You'd have one for the priests, 2014. The next one you'd have would be Raphia for the Levites. The next one you would have would be Panium for the Nethinims. So you would take this Spirit Prophecy quote and you would apply it 3 times. And in the 3 times that you'd apply it, it would all be the great test for that group of people. It's clear to see if you follow the lines. When Michael stands up, it is the close of probation for all mankind, and on another line of truth, it is the end of the judgment of the living, and the judgment of the living began at 9/11, it did not, and has 3 groups of persons that it tests and purifies, the priests, Levites, and Nethinims. Can you begin to see what he says? How many groups are there? The 3 groups of people that it tests, priests, Levites, and Nethinims. If it's priests, Levites, and Nethinims, and they're going to be tested by this concept of the great test, the great close of probation for them, what he's begun to do is mix up and muddle up the lines. Because when we start talking about the close of probation for the priests, where is the close of probation for the priests? I'm going to take these out so I don't confuse you. I'm going to place it here. This would be the close of probation for the priests. It's before the second advent. That's the second advent, the last waymark. That would be the second advent, so it's back here. If you're okay with that one. The close of probation for the Levites, where would that be? So that would be here. What's the problem with that? A dot is a point in time. And he's already said what? Close of probation for the Levites is progressive, without defining what progressive means. So if it's progressive, it began here and went to where? Went to the end. So we'll come to the Nethinims. Where's the close of probation for the Nethinims? Here. And that's too is progressive, so where does it end? So it ends here. So the question is, when we start talking about the close of probation for the Nethinims, which waymark do you want to pick? Do you want to pick the Sunday law or Daniel 12:1? When you talk about the close of probation for the Nethinims, which waymark do you want to pick? So what he has surreptitiously done, accidentally, depending on how you look at it, he said there's only 3 groups. If there's only 3 groups, how many close of probations must there be? 3 close of probations, 1 for each group. The first one begins where? Raphia, 2019. He holds to that. Don't care about the middle one. The end one. When is the end close of probation? What waymark do you want to give it? So I'm going to say 3 groups: priests, Levites, and Nethinims. We'll get rid of all of that. The close of probation begins at Raphia. Where does it end? Which waymark do you want to mark for the end of the close of probation for the Nethinims? So now you've got a dilemma. Are you going to call it the Sunday law, or are you going to call it Daniel 12:1? So it depends on the point that you want to make. That's what's important to see. So the point that he wants to make it here, 12:1. So he's going to go from the beginning to the end. But that may or may not be accurate. So what he wants to do is to say that you've only got 3 groups, and the last one is Daniel 12:1, where Daniel says is the close of probation for humanity. So Daniel 12:1 is marking the close of probation for which group of people? The Nethinims. Because he's going to say there's only 3 groups. This is the error that he's claiming that I teach. I'm going to read on. Michael stands up, it is the close of probation for all mankind, and on another line of truth, it is the end of the judgment of the living, and the judgment of the living began at 9/11. There's 3 groups of persons that it testifies and purifies: priests, Levites, and Nethinims. When Parminder's unholy emphasis on 4, priests, Levites, Nethinims, 144,000, closes of probation, with Parminder's unholy emphasis of 4 closes of probation, he also brought confusion in concerning the 144,000, which was a subject in this movement that was generally downplayed for Sister White counselors not to argue who the 144,000 are. So that's a nice argument, because Ellen White says, don't worry who the 144,000 are, and he's saying, if Ellen White says don't worry about it, then we should do what? Not worry about it. If I were to say the same thing when Ellen White says, don't worry about the subject of the daily, would he use the same argument to say, she says it, don't worry about it, so we shouldn't worry about it? Of course he would not do that. He would give a convoluted argument to prove why the daily is an important issue in our history, even though it wasn't in their history. The reason she says we don't need to know who the 144,000 is, because she's living in this history here, and there is no need for anyone to know. There is no way of anyone knowing when that's going to happen. Why don't they know? because that information is sealed. There's no way of them knowing that, and that's what she says. That's why she downplays this. It's not because we're not required to know who the 144,000 are. Just think about how crazy that one statement is. Ellen White says, let's not worry who the 144,000 is, therefore this movement should also not worry who the 144,000 is. Is that a tenable situation? Of course it's not. I had assumed it was a literal number, but also recognized the symbolic understanding of the 144,000 as well. But I did not make it an established point because it was error. There is no way that the 144,000 is a literal number. It just can't be when you take a thus saith the Lord. Whether you go to Ellen White's writings or the Bible or William Foy's writings, none of them will give you a clear, unequivocal statement that it's a literal number. You just can't do that. Parminder brought out William Foy's reference to the 144,000 being symbolic, and he did so in connection with his teachings that the 144,000 were priests. Like, that's something revolutionary, because this movement used to teach 144,000 are whom? Priests and Levites. So I just said it's not priests and Levites, it's only priests, and this then becomes some heretical statement just to try to clarify who they are. Parminder brought out William Foy's reference to 144,000 being symbolic, and he did so in connection with his teaching that the 144,000 priests. The reason he wants to do that is because he's going to say there are stacks of Levites in the church, and what's going to happen is, once you've got a couple of hundred of us, how many Levites are you going to get? 140, how are you going to take that number? 140,000 plus this X number, which will make up the Levites, and it'll all add up to literally 144,000. That's why he's saying, I'm forced to make it symbolic, because I'm only making it priests. These are all self-circular arguments. As they were identified in Revelation, this brought about a justification for making Daniel 12:1 the close of probation for the 144,000. And in so doing, opened the door to the idea that the door only closes for the foolish priests at Raphia. Now you begin to see where he comes to. But that the wise continue on to be tested at the next closed door, which is Panium, then the next closed door until you get to Daniel 12:1. I'll paraphrase what I'm saying, which is what he's correctly identified. The priest equal the 144,000. That's what I'm saying. So the priest close of probation is Raphia. I'll call it 2019. The Levites' close of probation is 2021, Panium. The close of probation for the Nethinims is the National Sunday Law, Daniel 11 verse 41, and I'm saying that the 144,000, their close of probation is Daniel 12:1. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And the priests have to navigate their way all the way through this history. And the problem or the issue that he's saying, that I'm teaching that's wrong, is that a priest gets to this 2019 test and passes it. But what must they do after that? They must go to 2021, they must go through that test, and they have the potential of failing the test. They go to this story, and they have the potential of failing the test as you go through. So, whether you can see it or not, what he wants to tell you is that the priest's close of probation, this is the story of the close of probation, begins and ends where? Here at Raphia, 2019. So in a few days, the close of probation for the priests is final and complete. There's no more opportunity for salvation if you're a priest after 2019. You cannot fail. You're completely sealed for eternity. The story is ended. Mike has stood up for you. That's what he's teaching here. That's why he only has 3 groups. You'll see this as we read on. it really becomes problematic when you start dealing with this. So he's going to say that this is what I would call a hard close of probation. There's no more opportunity after this event, to 2019. So he and all of his followers, none of them or all of them become righteous in this. They're going to give themselves a small window of opportunity. That's what they're going to do between November and January 2020. It's about a month and a week. No. 7 weeks. They've got about a 7-week small window that they've created for themselves because they're into time setting, that they're going to say this is the close of probation for all of those righteous priests. And after that moment, there is no opportunity to be lost. You're sealed. That's the position that they're taking. And the position that we have taken in this movement, that November the 9th, though it's a close of probation, is not a hard close of probation, we've still got a lot more to navigate through. And what you may not notice as he does that is that what he is doing, he's now shifted to what methodology? Progression. It's progression. You're going to progress from the priests to the Levites to the Nethinims, and there's no 144,000. There is no 144,000 line. And that in and of itself becomes extremely problematic when you start looking at that, because he's destroyed the line of the Nethinims. What waymark is this for the Nethinims? Second coming. In our next presentation, I'm going to draw this out so it's clearer for you, because I've not put all of the information in. This is the second advent for the Nethinims. This is their harvest. If this is the second advent for the Nethinims, who's that for? You begin to have this nebulous idea of humanity in general. Humanity in general is not a reform line. It's just this nebulous concept, this nebulous idea, which they no longer have a reform line for, unless you have this reform line here of the 144,000. And if you to do that, you are forced to come to a place where you have a close of probation for that group of people. That close of probation is not the close of probation for the Nethinims. Close of probation for the Nethinims is not marked by Daniel 12:1. It's marked by the National Sunday Law, Daniel 11:41. It's the beginning, and the beginning. So they've switched from a concept of repeat and enlarge to progression only. This concept destroys the purification of the church until Michael stands up, and destroys the idea that the ensign consists of a pure people that are only thereafter joined by other pure people. I explained that. First you have to purify the church. When you purify the church, what do? You purify the world. The world can only come into a purified church. Therefore, these people have to be pure. What does purification look like? It means you're fully sealed, fully perfect, everything's complete and done. So the Levites need to have had their close of probation before the Sunday Law, as the priests did. 2019, 2021. It's a hard close of probation. They need to be pure people so that other pure people can come in. All of this is pure, outright error. The reason it's error, because it's not consistent with the lines which they claim to believe themselves. If they claim to believe that their close of probation of the Nethinims goes from the Sunday Law to this point here, what they've done is destroyed the line. Because even though they want to call this Daniel 12:1, and Daniel 12:1 is the close of probation, this is not the close of probation for a Nethinim. How can it be? Because the close of probation, if I were just to do this line, what follows the close of probation? Harvest does. When is the harvesting of the Nethinims? It's here. This is the harvesting of the Nethinims. So how can you have the close of probation coming after the harvest? The close of probation has to be before the harvest, right here, where it's been placed on this reform line correctly. They're destroying their lines. They're no longer working upon line methodology anymore. What they're doing is going back, as Elder Jeff stated in his first presentation, going back to a Laodicean methodology, Laodicean ideology that doesn't use line upon line to work out its structure. So they have no idea how these lines work, even though they claim that they do. His confusion, my confusion, provides a model for an impure people until you get to Michael standing up. You need to ask yourself, is what I'm introducing confusion, is it an erroneous idea that we don't have a perfect people? It depends how you define perfection. Perfection is defined by the great test, not by something that you're not tested on. If you're not tested on something, you can't make a judgment on it. And the only one thing that we're tested on is the Sunday law issue. We're not tested on any other issue. If you wanted to go back to a Laodicean methodology, you would know that that's the whole premise, the foundation upon which Adventism stands. What's the difference between the Adventist church and the Catholic church? The Catholics steal, lie and cheat. They don't. Do Muslims? No. Do atheists? No. Do Adventists? No. The only distinguishing mark between us and them, I'll say it in a simple fashion, is the Sabbath issue connected with the sanctuary. That's the only distinguishing mark, and that's why Adventists believe it becomes the great test. It's a singular issue, not some nebulous idea. So when we take that concept and we apply it correctly, the great test for the priest is the Sunday law test for the priest, which is 2014. Then it becomes Raphia for the Levites and Panium for the Nethinims. That's what the great test is. That's where the judgment or the close of probation would be. That's where the great test, which then leads to the close of probation for those people. As I read these chats, I see he's got some personal chats. I don't know what they are. I see people that still hold to some of those concepts that were put in place by Parminder's satanic ideas. So you have to ask yourself the question, is it a satanic idea to understand that this is the second advent? Is it a satanic idea that the close of probation comes before the harvest? If those are satanic ideas, then he's introducing truth and error into his own narrative. At least we're fully satanic if we were to hold on to that. At least we're not a mixture of truth and error. And you know the definition of satanic theology is what? A combination of truth and error. They never teach error on its own. They always teach truth and error. And that's what we've seen right through this page and a half that we've read. At least what I'm teaching is consistent. It's either consistently all wrong or consistently all right. It's one of the two. And you can never have something that's consistently wrong all the way through, because there's no model for that. It's always truth and error against the truth. So by definition, this must be the truth because it's consistent. Millerite history is repeated in our history, and there was a noted controversy concerning the doctrine of the shut door in Sister White's age, and thus informing us that there will again be a controversy about the closed door in our history. He's correct on that. This is that controversy about what a shut door looks like. He's right upon that. What does the shut door of 2014 look like? And the reason why he won't tackle that is because he no longer accepts that 2014 was the Sunday law, the great test for the priest, because if he did, he'd destroy his own message. So he wants to shift everything to the close of probation, which is the close of probation here for the priest, which is Raphia, which is not our great test. Does the door close only for the foolish in that particular testing period, or does it close for both? We always taught, and Parminder would give lip service to the following. He's going to read. We always taught that the everlasting gospel was a three-step testing prophetic message that would develop and demonstrate character among those who held accountable for the testing process. We further taught that the first two of these prophetic tests, first and second angel's messages, took place while probationary time was open for those being tested, but the third test was different. in that it took place when probation closed at the third test and when both classes were then separated. And this is the error that Future for America have held on to from the very beginning. For many years, the third waymark, the third test, was a singular point in time. If you're familiar with those studies, you should know that. And then that got expanded to become a period of time. So if we do that, first, second, when you get to the second, we'd have a point in time which we would call the third. This is what used to be taught. And then what we realized, even they would testify to this, that this one became a period of time. They would call it time dilation. They came up with all these fancy theories, but it became a period of time. And so the third got put into this, and this is straight error. This is not correct. The third angel's message is not in this history when this is the close of probation, which is what he's just taught. It's not that, and the reason you know that, because if you go to the Great Controversy, or you go to early writings, and you run through the chapter titles, it says the third message closed. Sister Tess took us through that study. When does a third angel's message close? At the close of probation. The third angel's message closes at the close of probation. It doesn't begin at the close of probation. This is the close of probation. The third angel's message is here before the close of probation, not after it. This is the error that they are promulgating, which they're accusing us of doing. Both the parable of the tares and that of the net plainly teach that there is no time when all the wicked will turn to God. Now he's going to quote from the Spirit of Prophecy. Obviously the Spirit of Prophecy is correct. He's quoting from Christ Object Lesson, page 123, which is interesting because this is the ABC, the 1, 2, 3 of all of this, and they've got it wrong. They don't know where to place the work of the third angel. It occurs before probation closes, not after probation closes. The harvest is not the work of the third angel. It's clear to see that if you go into inspiration. Therefore, we, that's them, taught that the third test was different than the first two, which was wrong, and we explained it as a test where character is manifested or demonstrated. Where do you manifest character? When the plants are in the field, not when they're out of the field. A test, such as the pregnancy test, where the woman urinates, so he goes on to this model that he generated, which is all wrong. No probation, either red or blue, foolish or wise. Parminder destroyed that understanding by turning 3 marked closes of probation into 4 and then manufacturing confusion about who the 144,000 were. Because he wants to go back to a broken model to say that the close of probation, the 144,000 are both the priests and the Levites, and you can see where he's headed to that. He wants to make it a literal number. This is just taken from a portion of one presentation. That's one of I don't know how many presentations that they've made. You can clearly see how this is all a combination of truth and error, that they profess to give lip service to these lines, but they don't believe in the lines. They don't even know where to place the third angel's message. They're placing the third angel's message in the history of the harvest, where we know the third angel doesn't even do any harvesting. If you're not clear on that, just go to this chart. First angel, second angel, third angel. The third angel finishes its work, and then what do you see? Harvest. The harvest is after the third angel, not the third angel in the harvest. This is the mistake that they're making. It's one after another after another. We could go on and on showing you why they are completely wrong. I don't know what else to say. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we want to give you praise and thanks for your goodness. Help each of us, Lord, to be clear on what is truth and what is error. Help us to understand how these reform lines work so that they are not just a mechanical process. They're not just lines that we draw on a board that have no relationship relationship to the experience that we're going through. Help us to understand the work of the third angel. Lord, help us to see what the great test is. Lord, above all these things, help us to be honest in our reading of inspiration, that we would truly and accurately read a "Thus saith the Lord" and then make a proper application of what those words teach us. We pray for these blessings in Jesus' holy name. Amen.